Hello. I hope you can see me. I hope I'm visible and that you can hear me because I'm always having issues with this, but maybe not this time. All right. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining me. We have an important topic to discuss today. It's both new and not new. Thanks, Carrie. Glad to see that you can see and hear me. Okay, good. It's always comforting. I always have this thing about talking to nobody. I guess because it's happened before for like an hour until we found out nobody could hear me. All right. Anyway, so thanks for joining me. We're going to talk about the important news. Like I told you, it's new and not new, but it's very important to get into it and dig between the lines insofar as the relevance of it all, its significance, which is rather telling and also very much connected to some of the things that we've been talking about. If you've been paying attention, if you've been watching my videos and streams, you've probably noticed me talking about the left and Islam and their war on truth. And here's another perfect example, just happened. So what I'm going to do first is read to you the latest developments from a newspaper, a Spanish newspaper called Zenit from Barcelona. And this is from October 7th. So just 2-3 days ago. And I'm going to read it to you, and I might make some asides while I read it to you, but I'll be clear to let you know who's speaking, me, the report, or me. All right, so the title of this report is Spanish Catholic Priest Found Guilty of Hate Speech for Telling the Truth About Islam. Okay. The conviction of a Spanish priest for hate speech has ignited a national conversation about the boundaries of religious expression and freedom of conscience in modern Europe. Father Custodio Ballester, a Barcelona parish priest known for his outspoken views, was found guilty last week of making Islamophobic, quotes in the report, remarks in an article he wrote more than 7 years ago. At the center of the controversy is a 2016 essay titled The Impossible Dialogue with Islam, in which Ballester argued that genuine dialogue between Christianity and Islam remains unattainable under current conditions. The article was a direct response to a pastoral letter from Cardinal Juan Jose Omea, Archbishop of Barcelona, entitled, quote, The Necessary Dialogue with Islam. Ballester's critique was pointed, suggesting that, quote, for Islam, one either believes or remains an infidel to be subdued in one way or another. So that's what he had written. The report continues. 4 years later, in 2020, Catalonia's regional prosecutor accused the priest of violating Spain's hate speech laws, arguing that his article constituted a crime of hatred under national legislation. The case later expanded to include comments he and two others, Father Jesus Calvo and journalist Armando Robles, made in 2017 in a 2017 podcast that Muslim advocacy groups claimed incited hostility against their community. Okay, and of that, in another report, Ballester later said about that podcast that he's come under fire for, he said that what he said then is that, quote, radical Islam does indeed intend to destroy Europe and thus annihilate the West. So that's what he said, and that's what got all the Muslims and the leftists upset. The report continues. Spain's hate crime law carries penalties ranging from 1 to 4 years in prison and additional fines. While sentencing has not yet been finalized, Ballester has made clear his intention to appeal the ruling, even to the European Court of Human Rights, if necessary. My words were never discriminatory or hateful, he told the Catholic news agency. They want to use me as an example to make others silence themselves. Very important point, and we'll get into that. The report continues. The case has struck a nerve in Spain, where tensions between freedom of expression and anti-hate legislation has intensified in recent years. Critics argue that laws intended to curb extremism are now being weaponized to suppress legitimate debate, particularly on religious and moral issues. Isn't that interesting? On religious and moral issues, and we'll get into that. People are outraged, Ballester said, that so-called hate crimes are being punished as harshly as violent assaults or sexual offenses. And yes, that's true. Hate crimes in Spain and all throughout Europe, so-called hate crimes, are punished more harshly than if you get up and violently assault someone and if you rape someone. Think about that. And we will think and talk about that. For many observers, the issue extends beyond one priest's words, the report continues. It touches on a deeper cultural struggle over whether faith communities may still speak openly about their beliefs in societies that prize tolerance, yet increasingly police speech. In a Europe still grappling with questions of identity, pluralism, and faith, Father Ballester's case may become a defining moment in the fragile balance between free expression and social harmony. And now here are some more facts that I managed to cull just to give this particular case a little more context. So the reason he's being accused and he's facing all these charges and been found guilty, the people who brought the case against him is a Spanish activist group known as Muslims Against Islamophobia. And they're the ones who accused the priests of supposedly engaging in hate speech. And they cited Article 510 of the Spanish Penal Code, which prohibits, quote, discrimination related to the ideology, religion, or beliefs. And I find that, of course, interesting. Muslims Against Islamophobia is what here we would call CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations. And apparently it has the same exact function, which is to silence people, shut them down. Anyone who says anything critical, that is anything honest about Islam, is to be shut down and ruined and whatever, fired and etc. And I've spoken before about my own brush with CARE, and though happily I defeated them both times. They tried to shut me down when I gave a talk at Everett Community College in Washington State in 2011. And a more high profile case was in 2019, 2020, I was invited by the U.S. Army War College to speak about my book, Sword and Scimitar, 14 Centuries of War Between Islam and West. It was supposed to be a history lesson. And CARE and the leftists, they're always they're always connected at the hip, these two, for some odd reason, and we'll get into that, came at me very vehemently and at the War College and accused us all, of course, of all the stock names that are thrown around: racist, white supremacist, Islamophobe, bigot, xenophobe. And, the college did buckle. But then eventually, because of so much anger from Americans in general, including parents who were sending their kids to the college, they re-invited me. And the irony, of course, is you see when these places like Muslims Against Islamophobia or CARE engage in what they do, it's kind of a risky double-edged sword. Because if they win, okay, they win and they silence you. But if they lose, they create a lot of noise. And the end result is people want to know. So both of the talks that I gave in Seattle and in Pittsburgh at the U.S. Army War College were just packed. People were sitting on the floor and everyone wanted to know what it was about, and reporters were there. So that counterfired, because everyone, of course, wants to know what's all the hubbub about, bub. And that's the thing, it's just, I know I'm like that way. If I find out that there's someone I shouldn't listen to and that I don't, and he's a bad person, I shouldn't hear what he has to say. I want to know what he has to say. Okay. That's the kind of person I do want to hear. Not because, of course, necessarily that what they're going to say is true. But my point is, everyone's keen now that when someone comes up and tries to shut someone down because of hate speech, you're going to be curious. You really want to know. You don't think that person is just some psychotic hater who's running around talking meaningless nonsense. We're starting to realize hate speech is just another way of shutting people up. Okay. So the group that did this, that's behind this, is a CARE counterpart, Muslims Against Islamophobia, and it's operating in Spain, and it's exploiting Spanish Penal Code Article 510, which I quoted, which prohibits discrimination related to the ideology, religion, or beliefs of people. Okay, and again, it's always framed in these reports that I've looked at as what he said is a hate crime, right? And the irony is this group, and it's always like that, of course, the Muslim group that brought this case against him in the first place, Muslims Against Islamophobia, they are on record praising the Taliban. For example, according to the Spanish news outlet Libertad Digital, a spokesman from Muslims Against Islamophobia celebrated the Taliban's victory in Afghanistan, stating that, quote, "We are in favor of a people freeing themselves from the yoke of American and Western imperialism." Okay, so yeah, that's the topsy-turvy world we are in right now. Groups that seek to exploit laws in their favor and who are sympathetic to Islamic terrorists. Remember who the Taliban is. Okay, the Taliban is just one more Islamic group, and it's a Salafi group, etc. But it's those Muslims who take their Islam rather seriously, and so all the negative stuff comes along with it: hatred for the infidels, suppression of the infidels, killing blasphemers and apostates. Women are kept as chattel, sex slaves is permissible, all the usual, destruction of churches, religious temples, and et cetera, et cetera. So this Muslims Against Islamophobia group is happy to praise the Taliban, who does that, while in Spain it's crying because it's been triggered because a priest actually spoke truth, right? So that's where we're at. And then I guess another final point is that in court, Ballester explained that his remarks focused on radical jihadism and were not a generalization of all Muslims. They, on the other hand, the group Muslims Against Islamophobia, he said, the same people who support the Taliban and have said that the Catholic religion is, I can't make myself say it, S-H-I-T. This is him talking. He says that they said that this group has called the Catholic religion S-H-I-T, feces. And he continues, I've never said that about Islam, but of course you're still the bad guy. Okay, so these are the facts that we've just gone over of this case. The man has been found guilty. The only thing we're waiting on is to see if he's going to get the sentence of 3 years, which is what the prosecutors are pushing for, or if he won't. But the case actually has been decided, and he is guilty of hate speech and Islamophobia and all the rest. I get parched. All right. So now, at the center of the controversy of all this, the thing that got him in trouble is an essay, or really an email he wrote. Not an email. It's a short, they call it an essay, but it's a short article that appears online in Spanish. And it's entitled The Impossible Dialogue with Islam. And it came out in 2016. All right. So I'm going to go through it. I'm going to read it to you, most of it, at least the main excerpts. And I'm going to do a little commenting on it, and then I'll, give you a full analysis afterwards. But the primary point is this is what's getting this man in trouble. Okay, this what we're going to read at, and I'm going to look at now, is why he is a hateful person who's going to jail for 3 years. Okay, unless there's some sort of appeal or something changes. So he wrote in December 29th, 2016. This is what he wrote online, and you can find it online. He starts it off by quoting Quran 9:29, which I'm fond of quoting and have memorized because it's a very pivotal and important verse in the Quran, especially for the people of the book, us Christians and Jews and others. And so at the very top of his essay, it starts off by saying, "Fight those who do not believe in Allah and the last day, nor comply with what Allah and his messenger, Muhammad, have forbidden, nor embrace the religion of truth from among the people of the book until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves utterly subdued." All right, that's Quran 9:29. And this verse, of course, I've talked about it before, is the cornerstone verse that has declared eternal war on Christians and Jews. Okay, because it says the people of the book, Muslims themselves have defined the people of the book as Christians and Jews. And here's the commandment: you fight them until they do what? All this stuff about complying with what Allah and his messenger have forbidden, nor embrace this. And that means until they become Muslim. Okay, that's it. Or they pay the jizya, feeling themselves subdued and humbled, which means not only do they pay tribute monetarily, but they must know their place in an Islamic society, which is you are inferior. You have at best second-class status. And, you walk by the wall, and literally, because Muhammad said, when you see a Christian or a Jew coming, don't greet them, don't say the salam, but push them against the narrowest parts of the wall and the streets and the alleys. Okay, so that's what that verse is about. And Father Ballester begins his essay with this. And then he goes on saying, quote, "I don't think Monsignor Juan Jose Omeya was particularly inspired when he wrote his Sunday letter entitled The Necessary Dialogue with Islam." He's referring to I think an archbishop who wrote a letter for a Sunday homily called The Necessary Dialogue with Islam. And now Ballester continues, "This renewed revival of Christian-Muslim dialogue, paralyzed by the alleged foolery of the much-missed Benedict XVI, Pope Benedict, is far from a reality. Islam does not allow for dialogue. You either believe or you are an infidel who must be subdued one way or another." Yeah, we just saw Quran 929, right? And that is the gist of it, isn't it? Clear as day. Fight the people of the book until they embrace the true religion, Islam, or they pay tribute and feel themselves humbled and live in submission, or they keep fighting and die. Okay, well, that is Allah's word. So far, all he has done is quoted the Quran and essentially summarized it in what it is. And what he's saying is he wrote this response because this Monsignor Juan Jose Omea had in his letter, or in his Sunday letter, which was called The Necessary Dialogue with Islam, had again preached the need for dialogue with Islam. Okay, and we'll get into what that means. But it's not, it doesn't mean what it should mean. Dialogue with Islam would mean back and forth, right? Talking, trying to get to the bottom of things. That's not what it means, and we'll get into that. So he continues after what he said about missing, and the whole point about the foolery of Benedict is he's trying to say that Spaniards till this day, or Catholics, are still complaining that we can't have a good enough dialogue with Muslims because of that foolery of Pope Benedict, because of the way he upset them. And I'll get into that. And if you're a little older, you'll remember all the supposed outbursts that Pope Benedict did during his tenure around the 2000, the tens and so forth, which I'll talk about a little bit. So he continues, Catholic priest Ballester, by saying, it's like saying, this business about how we need Muslim-Christian dialogue. He continues by saying, it's like saying, with all the goodwill in the world, that Catholics must maintain an open and conciliatory dialogue with pro-abortionists, euthanasia advocates, and promoters of gender ideology. Well, no, that's not it. It's one thing not to despise people for what they believe and think and not persecute them for it, and quite another thing to have to put our faith into hibernation so that it doesn't clash with progressive dogma and the ideology that has declared war on our faith. Wow, good for him. He gets it. Yeah, and that's another very, very, very important point, which I'll elaborate on. But it's this little game that leftists and Islamists and those sorts who have a problem with reality and truth play, which is to say that if I criticize an ideology or a body of teachings, I am therefore attacking human beings, right? So if I talk about a doctrine in Islam, like he did, or I quote that verse or anything else, then that is a bodily attack on Muslims, is how it's being interpreted, okay? And that is, of course, a false conflation. And we'll get into that, but that's the game they play. And we'll even show you how, when it comes to other contexts, we're actually allowed to criticize ideologies all the time, right? But when it comes to Islam and others, we'll see how that goes. Okay. Now he continues in that controversial letter that got him in trouble. In countries where Muslims hold power, Christians are brutally persecuted and murdered. What dialogue are we talking about then? And the final straw is that in order to engage in dialogue, in addition to silencing our faith out of prudence, we have to bow down to their faith. It's the new style of the new era. Dialogue not only with Islam, with the Islamic faith, but also with the new social and moral engineering and all its aberrations. It's the trend, he says. Okay, and there it is again, a very correct and accurate statement of the state of affairs. Okay. The reality is, all throughout the Islamic world, Christians are being persecuted. Okay. If there's something to talk about and you're a Christian, that's probably what you should be talking about. You should be talking and dialoguing with Muslims in the Muslim world about all this Christian persecution. That seems like a good starting point, don't you think? And maybe if that can be alleviated, then a true dialogue and a true sort of evolvement can take place. Now, you would think, and I think that's what he's getting at in that sentence. But no, what we're supposed to do is ignore that and pretend everything's fine and humor the other, Islam in this case. And the more you humor them, then now you're tolerable and we'll talk with you and pretend we're friends, okay? But don't call out what we're really doing, okay? Because that might upset us and offend us. So he continues in his letter. He writes, quote, when in January 2011, a car bomb detonated by Islamists at the gates of the Coptic Cathedral in Alexandria left 21 dead and more than 70 injured among the faithful attending New Year's Mass, Pope Benedict XVI raised his voice to denounce what so many then and now want to silence or gloss over: the fierce persecution of Christians in Muslim countries. Yep, there you go. So what he's talking about, and I remember this very vividly, is in 2011, in front of the Two Saints Church in Alexandria, an Islamic terror attack. A bomb blew up, 21 Christians died. And, on the one hand, there was nothing singular about this, because this happens frequently, especially during that time. This was maybe one of like 20 similar attacks over the years on Christian churches, especially when they're packed during Easter or Christmas, according to the Orthodox calendar, or New Year's, as in this case. And I remember this one particularly because it wasn't just that the terrorists did what they did, but they were talking about how Muslims in the streets were stepping on the body parts that had been blown off Christians, stepping on it, stomping on it, and screaming Allahu Akbar and other Islamic triumphant slogans. So I do remember that. And I do remember that Pope Benedict actually did raise his voice to denounce this. Okay. And he did acknowledge the persecution of Christians in the Islamic countries. Okay. So, and what happened? Well, Ballester continues in his letter. This act, Benedict affirmed, the bombing of that church, the Coptic church in Alexandria, this act, Benedict affirmed, offends God and all humanity. This vile act of death, such as placing bombs near the homes of Christians in Iraq to force them to leave, offends God and all humanity, who just yesterday prayed for peace and began a new year with hope. And again, now he's expanding it and showing you that the Islamic terror attacks is not limited to the Copts of Christians, because it's not. Now he's mentioning those in Iraq. And of course, this goes on and on and on. One of the more recent ones, of course, happened in Syria under the new regime, which is our friend and ally, apparently, who's also a terrorist. And, a church in Damascus was bombed, or actually 2 terrorists entered and opened fire, and one of them detonated himself. And I think 25 people or so died, many women and children. Par for the course. If you've been following and you've been in this field like I have, this is quite common. This happens very, very many times. So this is what Benedict was talking about and affirming and saying that this act, God, and his point when he's talking, he's saying God doesn't like this, and he's trying to indicate to Muslims. And if you believe in a real God, that God wouldn't like it either. He wouldn't like the egregious murder of people who are quietly worshiping in a temple, even if they're not. Even if God is Allah, that doesn't make sense, is what he was saying. So now he continues. We're almost done. And he writes, after Benedict said all this, he writes, Father Ballester, he writes, quote, "The Islamic response was swift and terrible. The Grand Imam of Al-Azhar University considered these words unacceptable interference." And he did. I remember that. That's what he said. Like, this is for Pope Benedict to dare say that there's a problem in certain Muslim countries and Christians are being mistreated. How dare he? Okay. Sheikh Ahmed Al-Tayyib of Al-Azhar was outraged that he would dare criticize. He's supposed to say nothing other than, "Oh yeah, these guys these are terrorists who don't even stand for Islam, and they would as soon as kill Muslims as they would Christians. This is not about Christianity, Islam, blah, blah, blah." That's what Egypt was waiting for him to say, but he didn't say that. Okay. So Al-Azhar's Grand Imam of Al-Azhar said, completely disagreed, and he said, "I don't agree with the Pope's point of view," and he ceased all dialogue that was going on at the moment and recalled the ambassador, okay, the Al-Azhar ambassador from the Vatican. In other words, formally saying, "Okay, we're done. We're not going to talk anymore," simply because Pope Benedict acknowledged the truth and was hoping for Muslims to also acknowledge what's before the entire world's eyes, in the hopes that they can ameliorate it. Okay, like I said, real dialogue, useful dialogue, not a show, not theater. Okay, and the thing about Pope Benedict is he's actually near and dear to me in a way. Again, I'm not Catholic, but much of my career actually begins and surrounds deals with Pope Benedict. In fact, I looked it up. One of the very first articles that I maybe it's gone. Anyway, one of the first articles that I had ever written, which was almost 20 years ago, was about Pope Benedict upsetting Muslims. And it came out in the LA Times. And it was called "Islam Gets Concessions, Infidels Get Conquered." It came out in 2006. And it was, again, about how Muslims were so upset because Pope Benedict, at that time in 2006, was apparently visiting the Hagia Sophia in Turkey, which then was still a museum, not a mosque as it is today. And everyone was uptight that if he dares enter and maybe like makes the sign of the cross or prays, that means he's trying to appropriate it and turn it back into a church. And Muslim and the media was warning that, everyone's afraid Muslims are going. Literally, I remember the verbatim quote. I was trying to pull it up and show it to you, that Muslims were going to go into a paroxysm of fury because he entered and made a sign of a cross. So Pope Benedict, good for him, was at least honest. All right, and that's why he had to resign, right? Because he was he was less a diplomat and a politician and more a pope. Okay, in keeping with historical popes who actually cared about their flocks, who actually knew what Islam was about, and who dealt with it. Remember, historically, the number one element, let's say, in the European world medievally that called for crusades and supported it and didn't want anything to do with Islam was the Catholic Church. It was the popes, it was the bishops, it was the priests, it was the monks, and they would even fight and be at the front fighting alongside other regular crusaders and so forth. So that's very interesting. And again, we are entering this realm about truth. Where are you aligned with truth? I know you call yourself a pope or a priest, but are you aligning yourself with the truth? Because if you do, you're actually going to come off abrasive and politically incorrect and a hater, as Father Ballester is called a hater for the reasons that we're seeing. And what has he done so far? I'm almost done reading his critique or his essay that appeared in 2016. And what has he said? The truth? He's spoken historical and doctrinal truths, all of which Muslims acknowledge when they're talking to each other. Okay. And anyway, so he continues. And this is an important part. It's kind of long, but so he continues in his essay. He writes, quote, "And you have to get inside the Moors' heads to understand them." He's referring to Muslims. Well, of course, the Spaniards, Muslims are the Moors. So he's trying to get into their head to understand how they think. And he writes, and he continues, "Christians in Muslim territory are tolerated and protected. They are dhimmi. That is, if they pay tribute to Islamic power by paying the jizya, a special tax paid only by Christians in order to practice their faith without being persecuted or condemned. Christian minorities in Muslim majority countries like Syria or Iraq are forced to pay the jizya to avoid being killed or enslaved. And this, of course, is a special state of grace that can be terminated whenever the religious or political powers deem it appropriate." All true so far. "That is why they consider it an intolerable interference for Pope Benedict XVI to interfere in the internal affairs of a Muslim country, no matter how many dhimmi Christians they kill. Infidels are the property of the state, which can dispose of them as it sees fit, either by collecting the infidelity tax, the jizya, or by exterminating them. What does the Pope think he is, trying to impose standards of conduct on Muslim countries?" He's being facetious and sarcastic here. So as you can see, he's getting into and showing us how Muslims think. And this is absolutely true. This is here's how a Muslim thinks. Okay. Islamic law, which we looked at Quran 929. There's other aspects about how Christians and Jews and anyone who pays tribute has to be a second class citizen, as it's called, though in practice it seems more like a third class citizen. But all of that is there, and it's part of the religion, and Muslims know this. Okay, so who is this filthy infidel in Europe telling us how to run our country? Okay, these Copts, these Assyrians, these whatever who live in Iraq and Egypt and Syria, they're ours. Okay, we deal with them. We give them what we give them. We give them peace when we want, and if we're upset about them, we're going to give them destruction. And so, who are you to interfere? And that right there just shows you that they're not interested in dialogue. Okay, they're interested in conformity. They want you to conform to their way. And of course do it in the context of a dialogue, because that's good for show. Like I said, it's theater, okay, and it helps improve their image. And then he continues, Pope Father Ballester, he writes, quote, "Then the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar University, the same one who harshly criticized Benedict XVI, Ahmed al-Tayyib, will come and embrace Pope Francis. But that will not change the nature of an Islam founded on a direct and immediate revelation that became a book, the Quran, indisputable and uninterruptible. Uninterpretable. As it is written, it must be believed. Prayer, almsgiving, the pilgrimage to Mecca, and jihad and the extermination of the infidels. Okay, so here we go. That's the whole point, right? It's in the book. It's part of Islam. There's no way around it. But then why is it that on the one hand, Ahmed al-Tayyib, yanked the ambassador from the Vatican and was upset. And on the other hand, he meets up with Francis. So let's look into it. Okay, he continues. This is the last paragraph. Ballester writes, quote, and the meeting between Francis and Ahmed al-Tayyib, the Sheikh of Grand Azhar in Egypt, Al-Azhar, and the meeting itself is not the point. The encounter between Francis and the Grand Imam does not in itself transform a reality that is hundreds of years old, nor the story of Muhammad, the prophet who spent his entire life going from raid to raid, subduing those who opposed him with blood and fire. The meeting cannot be the message. A hug and a photo mean nothing if one lacks the courage to say that Islam has evident elements of violence in the Quran and in the life of Muhammad. If one continues to say that Islam is a religion of peace, one only creates confusion and perplexity, and especially if one lacks the courage to place opposite the figure of Muhammad the warrior, the image of the crucified one, the Lord of the universe. A good difference, isn't it? Or is it imprudent to remind Muslims of the distinct nature of the Christian religion? And this, of course, is another very important point. You would think Pope Francis, if he actually cared about Muslims the way he should, because he should care about all humanity, because that's the whole point of Christianity is altruism, why doesn't he talk about Jesus Christ? Why doesn't he try to actually bring them into the fold of Christianity if he really cared? No, because he's more of a diplomat, or was, okay? And he's more interested in just a show, and so was Ahmed. And as you can see in this excerpt I just read to you, all the hugging and kissing, and I was going to pull up a picture, unfortunately it's gone, which shows just that. It wasn't even a picture, it was several pictures of Ahmed, of the Grand Imam and Pope Francis, literally hugging and kissing, okay? And the point is, you can do that all you want. It doesn't change the reality of what's happening, okay? Including Christians in Egypt, where Sheikh Ahmed is from, being killed and slaughtered and their churches bombed. That's just a fact, right? But this is something actually I followed and have looked at for a long time. Francis and back in the day, and Sheikh Ahmed al-Tayyib, they signed joint declarations, and there was a lot of hoopla about it. Like, this is going to change. It's like the Abrahamic Accords. It's one of those deals, we've signed something. And the thing was that nobody seemed to understand is I would read these, and they sounded good. They're talking about fraternity and brotherly respect and love between Muslims and Christians. And, we all believe in, Jesus in some respect. He's a prophet amongst Muslims and all that. And I've talked a lot about that. And then to show you the extreme disdain that this guy, Sheikh Ahmed al-Tayyib, had, especially for Pope Francis, almost like the next day he would appear and speak Arabic, and speaking in Arabic in Egypt on TV, and he would say all the exact opposite stuff. He would start talking about the importance of Islamic Sharia and the importance of apostasy laws, and parched. And he would then start sounding basically like an ISIS kind of guy, right? He would that's exactly literally what he would sound like. No difference. In fact, there was a little controversy some years back, and it was during this time when Ahmed and when Sheikh Ahmed and Pope Francis were buddying it up. But there was this controversy because even though Al-Azhar, the most prestigious Islamic university in the Islamic world, in Egypt, in Cairo, even though they were regularly lambasting Egyptian intellectuals and attacking them and essentially they were calling them blasphemers and apostates because, let's say, they questioned something about Islam, or they said something liberal as in liberal theology, they would be immediately lambasted and condemned, and sometimes have to go in hiding, and sometimes would get arrested. But then they would never condemn the Islamic State, even at the height of its atrocities in Syria and in Iraq in 2014, 15, and 16. People would ask them, will you not condemn them? And they would not condemn them. And they said, this is not for us to decide. This is for Allah to decide. All we know is they're saying they're saying the Shahada. There's no Allah but Allah, and Muhammad is Rasulullah, and we can't get involved. All right. Look at the kind of reticence that they exhibited, including this Sheikh Ahmed al-Tayyib, when it came to groups that in the name of the religion were crucifying and burning people alive and beheading them and literally enslaving women like animals. Okay, they would not say you're not Islamic. They would not. The word is you kafaruhum, which is like to turn them into an infidel. Okay, which is basically say you're no longer, you're out of the Islamic, you're not part of the ummah, you're an infidel, which means you're an enemy. Okay, they would not do that, but they'll do it to these, mild academics and liberals in Egypt who write a, open-minded novel. And so that's the kind of guy, Sheikh Ahmed al-Tayyib, the man who would meet up with Pope Francis and kiss and hug him. And what was it all about? It was just a show. Okay, so that's the whole point. Pope Benedict was the bad guy because he actually cared, right? And he called it out for what it was, and he wanted to make a difference, actually, in the lives of Christians, and he was honest. And Pope Francis, I'm sorry to say, and I don't like, bad talking someone who died, but everyone knows this. It's very obvious, and he was the opposite. He would not, he wrote an encyclical about, the environment, which is fine. If you're for, I don't even know much about it, but fine. But you would think that as the Pope, as the reigning supreme Catholic, at least for Catholics, head, I don't know how many Catholics. There's well over 1 million, maybe 1.5 million Catholics in the world, and a lot of them are being butchered and slaughtered during his time as well, including in Nigeria and all throughout Africa. Well, how about an encyclical about that? An encyclical is a very important letter that a pope would write, and goes around and gets spread around amongst Catholic churches and parishes and is read and creates awareness. Why didn't he do that? Okay, so that's anyway. That gives you an idea. So we've now seen the facts. We've seen what is going on. Father Ballester, Custodio Ballester, who is now facing 3 years in prison because of what I just read to you. What I just read to you is under any normal circumstance would be considered a guy who's brave and speaking the truth. A guy who actually is altruistic and cares and is trying to make a difference and trying to save human lives of Christians, let's say, and human souls of Muslims. All right. Good guy. Well, now he's facing 3 years in prison in the liberal West. Okay. So let's look at some observations. And the first thing that occurs to me as I read this and as I, hang on. As I read this and, I let it percolate in my head is, this whole business about hate speech and Islamophobia and all the legislation. Okay, and here's a really important philosophical question that I think we all need to address and get to the bottom of. It's a simple question. For us as a society, or individually or as a society, what is really more important in this world? Okay, truth, even though it leads to criticism, skepticism, maybe negative feelings, or lies that support feel-good narratives. Okay, what sort of society are we supposed to be? And what is more important to you? And I'd like to hear that, actually. Okay, because the truth sometimes hurts. We know that. The truth is sometimes depressing, and the truth is not what we want to hear, but it's true. And I, for one, love the truth. Okay. My first book, The Al-Qaeda Reader, which came out in 2000, I started writing in 2005, but it came out in 2007. It was dedicated partially to aletheia, which no one knows what it means, but it's a Greek word for truth. Okay. So I like truth, even if it hurts me, even if it's something that's not something, going to help me out or even make me look bad in certain ways. You ever wonder when a guy like me named Ibrahim writes what I write about Islam, how in fact it actually kind of in a way hurts me too? Because your average person who, based on my writings and other people's, in this field, all they'll know is, oh, these people with these weird names and that look like me and have a name like Ibrahim. Oh, they're bad, they're dangerous. Well, so I know that, and but I still write what I write because it's the truth, and I know I'm kind of an innocent casualty in a way. I'm not saying it happens a lot, but it does happen, especially in airports, when I'm late and running, and I have a propensity for sweating, and I'm 6'3" and big and sweaty, and then they open my bag because I always in the metal detector I always go off because I have metal all inside my body. And then they open my bag and there's actual Arabic writings from Al-Qaeda because I'm translating them. Yeah, it can be bad for me. So, but that's not enough for me to actually say, okay, now I'm going to hide the truth. In other words, I'm less interested in what's good for me which might be a lie, and much more interested in just the absolute supreme truth reign. And then all of us, have to somehow align ourselves with it for our own good. Okay. So anyway, that's the question. What's more important? Unvarnished truth. Okay. Which will of course it will lead. So in the current case, this business with Islam, this Catholic priest, look what he's saying and all that he said. Well, it's true. It's historically true. It's doctrinally true. It's contemporarily true. Okay. And we can get into all that. But he's going to jail for it. Why? Because it's creating skepticism, maybe hostility, maybe dislike, but maybe that's a good thing. If truth leads to it, let's say truth leads to hostility to something, but isn't that good? Because that is the net result of truth. Then that means there should be hostility to something. If an ideology preaches violence and hatred and, subjugating this person and women and children and whatever, okay, maybe, and I know that, and the net result is that I grow to despise it. Isn't that a good thing? Now, the flip side is this current idea, which is no, we don't care about the truth. We're more interested in saying whatever we have to say so we can support the narrative. Okay. And in this case, the narrative in the current context of our case is Islam is a perfectly legitimate religion. It's no different than any other religion. It can fit in perfectly in Western society. And, that's it. So now we have to compromise. We have to lie. We have to suppress the truth in order for that sort of feel-good narrative to exist and spread. And this is it. This is the clash that we're watching. We're watching people who want to express and say the truth, no matter what the end result is, and people who are, so it's almost like the means to an end and the ends to the means. So the left and Islam are more interested in the ends justifying the means. And what is the end? That Islam can come and live in Europe, in this case. And the means, so that end justifies the means, which is lying. Whereas in the other case, it's the means justify the end. So what are the means? The truth. And in this case, if you find out Islam is totally incompatible because Muslims are all about subjugating the non-Muslim and having hatred for them. You might have seen my recent video or live stream where I spent a lot of time talking about the doctrine of al-wala wal-bara, which is a ironclad doctrine in the Quran. And from beginning to end, all it does is command Muslims to hate non-Muslims. Do you want to bring people into your society that are commanded to hate you? I mean, think about that. But if we have to lie because if the truth comes out, well, you're not going to want those people in, and ooh, that's negative, that's bad, that's xenophobic, that's Islamophobic. Okay, but you're also acting in accordance with truth, and you're saving lives, innocent lives. It makes sense. Okay, so this and going back to the Pope Benedict and Pope Francis, and to show you how all that fits in, think of it this way: what's more important? Saying that Christians are being persecuted throughout the Islamic world the way Benedict did, because it's true, even though that upset Muslims and leftists and they complained and they yanked their ambassador, et cetera, or is it better to pretend, oh, there's no such thing, and those people who are doing it, like as Pope Francis pretends, are just bad people. They have nothing to do with Islam. This isn't about Islam and Christianity, and you lie and you say that in order just so he and Sheikh Al-Tayyib can appear hugging each other and kissing each other, right? And this is what comes down to, and this is the real question that everyone has to confront. Whenever you hear this business about hate speech, okay, what's really going on is it's an assault on truth, okay? Because you know what? If what you're saying is hateful and it's not grounded in truth, it'll be exposed. People are not that stupid. The people who try to hide everything, the censorship czars, I think they have this, or they want people to think that you're so dumb that if you just hear something, even though it's easily refuted, you're just going to act on it. That's just another one of their pretexts. Okay. And then, so what are the pros and cons of what I just spoke about, the truth? Okay. So what's the pro of, acknowledging a truth, even though it's going to lead to whatever skepticism, cynicism, criticism of a religion, xenophobia, whatever, right? The pros of it are, well, you are aligned with the truth. And in the current case, guess what? You're not going to have people dying in your country. No one's going to come and blow themselves up. No one's going to enter a church, shoot people, bomb it, burn it down, which of course happens as well in Europe and in the United States. Okay, you're not going to have that because those people who do believe in that, and we've already established it empirically, are not allowed in. And that's how certain countries act, and they don't have any problems. Hungary, for example, I believe Japan as well. Okay, they don't have an Islamic problem for some reason. Okay, whereas all throughout Western Europe they do. Okay, so there's the obvious pro. And what is the con? Well, it's the flip side. It's just the con is for the cons, the ones who are trying to pull a con on you. Okay, they're trying to con you because they're cons and they want to get away with it, right? Who are the ones that are always fighting against common sense and reason and logic and truth? In this case, it's the Muslims, okay, in the West, who are a minority, and it's even the so-called the political elite, the left, as they call them, who are also a numerical minority compared to other Western people. Okay, so you always find people who are minorities who have ill will and negative and evil agendas. They're all the ones who are crying about, rights and freedom and tolerance and you're hateful and this and that, because that's just a weapon. Okay, that's the con. That's what these cons use, and that's the con of buying into these ideas, which go against truth. Okay, they're currently weak, they're currently outnumbered, so they have to guilt trip you into actually going their way. That's what this is all about. Okay, no outside of the West, no one has ever heard of things called hate speech. Okay, where you actually, especially if you're speaking the truth, and it's something that the entire society culturally and traditionally believes, like Spain. Okay, this is all, of course, absurd. Now let's consider what I've been discussing, what we're looking at here, but in the context, and this is now important, it goes back to something I read earlier, and I'll explain. But let's consider in the context of criticizing ideology, not people. Okay, as you've seen in one of the reports, Barristan was found guilty of, quote, hate speech in accordance with Article 510 of the Spanish Penal Code, which prohibits, quote, discrimination related to the ideology, religion, or beliefs. Okay. Now, here's his defense. He has said the following, the Catholic priest Ballester. He said, quote, I didn't speak about... He said, quote, I didn't speak about individual Muslims, but rather about the threat of radical Islam. And that is the absolute truth. I've criticized the criticizable aspects of Islam, but I've also praised its positive aspects, he says. Okay. Now, this is a very, very important point. Okay. We are not, I am not, he is not, and I suppose many of you are not, I would think, if you're logical. We're not criticizing people. We're criticizing an ideology and those who align themselves with this ideology. This is so much different than, very different than when you criticize a human being. I've said this repeatedly every time when someone, I'll talk about an Islamic doctrine and then all of a sudden someone will come. This goes way back. There's a video from 2005 with this woman in LA, and we're walking around talking. And, she likes everything I'm saying. I'm talking about the Al-Qaeda reader. And then she's like, well, we don't want this stuff to, make people attack Muslims. And my point, and I said the same thing then, okay, the reason I tell you that is just like Father Ballester and me, this is such an important point that is always conflated. There's a difference between criticizing, calling out an ideology, and calling out and condemning human beings who are to this degree or that associated with that ideology. And I'll get into that as well. All right. But, and what do I mean by that? The simple fact is, first of all, we do that all the time. In certain other contexts, it's allowed. Okay. And I'll give you the perfect example. And I've said this many times before. I always give this what I call the Nazi analogy. The Nazi analogy with Islam. One moment. So, I have said the following many times, and I think this is the best way to understand the difference between Islam as a body of teachings and Muslims as adherents who align themselves, associate themselves with this body of teachings in varying degrees. Okay, moderates and radicals, and I'll explain what I mean. So, take Nazism, and that was a coherent body of ideology. It's an ideology. Nazism is an ideology. And, and its adherents have written about it, and they've articulated what Nazism is. And a lot of it is, of course, intolerant to the other, whether it's racial supremacy and so forth, it promotes violence, etc., etc. The long and short of it is people in the West have condemned it until this very day. No one's going to protect Nazi ideology. In fact, you'll go to jail, but it's an ideology. Okay. And, but for me, when you talk about Nazi ideology at the same time, now what about Nazis? So doesn't that mean all Nazis are evil? If Nazi ideology is evil and bad, what about Nazis? Obviously, they're all bad. And here's where I beg to differ. And my argument is as follow. Okay, so we know Nazism as an ideology is bad and has all sorts of problems, but Nazis find themselves aligned with it for various reasons. Okay, and it's the same with religion, and I'll get into that. So some of the Nazis historically actually favored it for its, most of them I would argue, for its economic boons. That was it, not for its ideological vision. And that's why they were part of it. It was part of the winning team from an economical point of view and for getting jobs and, bringing Germany out of the Great Depression. Okay. Others, of course, liked it, especially for its supremacist and racial theories. All right. And, right. So you had a broad, even though, so we can talk about the ideology and then we can talk about the people and how they fit in. Right. And, so someone like, I'll give you an example, Oskar Schindler, German, and he's a Nazi. He was a member, actually, a formal ranking member. And look what he did. What's his story? He saved and helped Jews at no small risk to himself, right? So how do we reconcile what he did, this good deed, with the negative creed that he is formally associated with, Nazism? Well, we reconcile it by saying he was part of that group. But when it came to certain things, like human lives and altruism and not being supremacist, he rose above that. And he actually, at no small risk himself, saved lives. Okay. But he was a Nazi. So now what do we say about that? Do we say he was a moderate Nazi and moderate Nazism is therefore okay and we should allow it? Nobody ever does that. Right. What we do is we acknowledge reality. We say, no, Nazism is bad. This guy was a member of the Nazi party, but in certain aspects, when it came to the really negative stuff, he transcended it. He was better than that. But we don't rationalize and say now Nazism is good and therefore don't ever criticize it. Nobody does that. Now take the same logic, take the same paradigm, and apply it to Islam and Muslims. Okay, Islam's a body of teachings. We can look at it, we can discuss it, right? And lo and behold, there are a lot of negative, violent teachings within Islam. And we can, as we opened up with Quran 929, an open-ended call for Muslims to fight Christians and Jews until they either become Muslim by force, pay tribute, live as second-class citizens, slaves, really, or die, right? That's, I would say, pretty negative. That, I would say, has a supremacist element. In fact, the Quran is full of actual supremacism. And according to Islamic law, the kafir, the infidel, his blood is not worth the blood of the Muslim, and all sorts of things that are part of the ideology. So we can sit and say that and call it out the way it is, just like we did with Nazism. But for some reason, when we do that, all of a sudden, this is an attack on Muslims. Okay, even though Muslims are actually like Nazis in the sense that they fit in with Islam in a degree of ways. First of all, remember, most Muslims are just born into it. Okay, believe it or not, a lot of Muslims don't even know what this is about, don't want to know. They have an idea. There's some issues. They're just nominal Muslims. Okay, and maybe a lot of them would even leave if they could, if there wasn't this apostasy law and being ostracized, from your family and from society. So there are those Muslims, right? And then there are those Muslims who love what Islam teaches. Okay, the radicals. Just like there were Nazi members who just thrived on Nazism's supremacist elements. Yeah, you definitely have Muslims who love that stuff. That's what we call radicals. All right. But this entire excursus, my whole point is to show you that we are in a society that openly does attack and criticize ideologies, right? We've done it with Nazism, do it with communism, etc. And we also know how to separate people and say, yeah, Oskar Schindler's an okay guy, he's a good guy, even though he was a Nazi. So we understand that, just because the ideology is bad doesn't mean everyone is guilty. So why on earth can't we do this with Islam, right? We should be able to. I do. But the whole point, I guess, is it is, again, not to let you know the truth about this religion, right? Because you can be open. You can say, hey, Islam is violent, intolerant, et cetera, et cetera. But that doesn't mean everyone born named Muhammad is out to kill me. I mean, do you know how many people who are Muslim that you might look at today and not know much about and think, oh, that guy's a radical? And in fact, tomorrow he becomes a Christian. But in the last 10 years, he was actually struggling. And, he was this close to becoming a Christian. He's reading the Bible and praying and having visions of Jesus, but all you see is a Muslim. So there's definitely a lot of grades is what I'm trying to tell you here. And just because there's an idea, you can attack and call out an ideology for what it is. That does not mean that everyone who is aligned with it in varying degrees is guilty. And it also doesn't mean that they're not, because a lot of them, of course, by their fruits, you will know them when it comes to this, sort of tangled issue that we're discussing. But it is important. All right. So, for example, according to all the penal codes of Spain, which we're talking about, and most Western nations, which prohibit, quote, this is Spain, but it's similar in most Western nations, they prohibit, quote, discrimination related to the ideology, religion, or beliefs of others. Okay, so we can't criticize Nazism, right? That's what that law says, or any kind of ideology, cannibalism, that's it, right? Because these are all ideologies. So the way the law is written, then we should stop criticizing Nazism. It's a body of belief. Why are we doing it? So my point in saying all this is to show you the inconsistency of all this sort of thing. And that's what we're going to look at next. The real goal of what's happening, the real purpose of all this. And I'll be taking some super chats very soon. I'm almost done. All right. So let's look at a few more quotes on how the left and Islam, and you know how I feel about that, have converged in this recent case. And in short, in a very predictable way. So according to the original news report I read, Zetit, it says, quote, the case about Father Ballester has struck a nerve in Spain, where tensions between freedom of expression and anti-hate legislation have intensified in recent years. Critics argue that laws intended to curb extremism are now being weaponized to suppress legitimate debate, particularly on religious and moral issues. Now, isn't that interesting? Why religious and why moral issues? Well, one is Islam and one is the left. Okay, by trying to weaponize and suppress legitimate debate on religion, well, that's obviously a clear reference to Islam. And by trying to suppress legitimate debate on moral issues, that's for the left, as we call it. Okay, who is immoral, right? It's so obvious. This is what this is all about. Because, as I mentioned before, Islam and the so-called left cannot debate in the realm of ideas because their ideas are manifestly wrong and cannot be represented in the face of truth and always fall apart. This is why they wage a war against truth in the name of suppression and censorship. In Islam, it's just straightforward because no one's going to be fooled by, the sort of the left approach in the West. So in Islam, it's draconian. Hey, you speak up, you die. You argue about Islam, you say anything offensive about Muhammad, you say anything offensive about our religion, you ask it, you bring it into question, you're a blasphemer, you're done. In the West, it's the same idea, but it's exploiting Western goodness or Western naivety, which is almost synonymous at this point, by saying, oh my God, if you say the truth, I'm going to get triggered and fall apart and scream and die, which is all nonsense and it's a lie, okay? So that's what's happening. Okay, these two groups, which seem so different, Islam and the left, have the same problem, which is they hate Christian civilization, mores, and ethics, and they're in it and they want to take over. Okay, and historically, Islam does it by just sheer force, right? But now that small groups of Muslims are in the West, and you have these leftists in the West, and both are a minority, they play this poor victim card. And so all they have is these words: Islamophobia, homophobia, racism, xenophobia, all of which exist to shut truth down because they cannot win in the realm of debate. Okay. And let me continue with some quotes. Ballester said people are outraged about what's happening, that so-called hate crimes are being punished as harshly as violent assaults or sexual offenses. So in Spain, and of course all throughout Europe, so-called hate crimes, meaning speaking the truth, is as punishable as violent assaults and rape. Okay, well that makes sense, right? Because in the current sort of nihilistic climate amongst the elite and the government, truth is just as dangerous as sexual offenses. And the more Spain continues moving leftist, which is more towards madness and insanity, truth will be seen even as much more dangerous than even things like sexual offenses. Because, hey, what's worse, the guy speaking truth and creating problems, or a guy who's, a minor attracted person who, transgressed? It's okay. So get ready for a lot of that. And now here's another telling quote from Ballester. He told Catholic news agencies the following, quote, "The prosecution demonstrates with its actions that so-called hate crimes exist to restrict freedom of thought and expression. The hate law is legally a blank check. Not even the hate law is legally a blank law or a blank check. Not even the prosecutors themselves know how to define hate. They fabricate the crime in each case based on who allegedly committed it, and it's a one-way crime. They only charge Christians, never Muslims." So once again, here's more proof, more evidence that hate crimes and these laws exist only to help one side. He mentioned Muslims, but of course it's Muslims and the so-called leftists. And this comes out very clearly in the next paragraph of what Ballester said to the Catholic news agency. Okay. Actually, it's the Catholic news agency, after quoting him, writes the following, quote, "Ballester has been criticized also for his advocacy of Catholic doctrine regarding homosexuality and procured abortion. Leftist LGBTQ activists have accused him of homophobia." Remember what I just said? He has said that Spanish justice appears to prosecute supposed Islamophobia and homophobia with rigor, but looks the other way when Christians are involved. He has also denounced the persecution of Christians in places like Nigeria, Syria, and Bangladesh. Okay, so there you go once again. Isn't it interesting? It's not just Muslims. It's not that Muslim advocacy group that's calling him an Islamophobe and a hater that are the problem. It's these leftists. It's the LGB people, and because he's against homosexuality and he's against abortion, they're also using the hate card. Okay, why? Because in the realm of reality, they can't argue. Everything about them is exposed. Okay, and we've already discussed that. So this is, once again, we've converged. We've looked at the story and we've converged and come right back to the original issue, which is why the left and Islam, even though they're so different, one is just debauched and depraved and perverted, and the other is just draconian and savage and violent and intolerant, patriarchal, and the other one doesn't believe in any genders. And yet they're such friends, and they always cover for each other, and they always protect each other in the name of rights and human rights and anti-hate speech. Okay, and it's just obvious who and what they are. Okay, they are groups. They are epistemologies that do not accord or fit in with truth. And by the way, when I say truth, I'm not necessarily even speaking about religious truth, because someone's gonna say, "Oh, well, your Christian truth is not mine Christian truth." No, we're beyond that at this point. When I talk about truth, I'm talking about reason, science, basic morality and decency and ethics, all of which, of course, do fit in a Christian paradigm. Okay. And because these groups do not fit in that way, so for example, Pope Benedict, just to cap it off, I was talking about him. One of the things that got him in so much trouble initially was that he quoted Emperor Manuel II Comnenus, a Byzantine emperor, talking about Islam and with Muslims. And, the quote was basically, how if God is reason, God is logos, God is logic. So how can he command you Muslims to do what you're doing? Because none of this is rational. Forcing people by violence to become faithful is not rational. Paying jizya, God saying, "Hey, I'm going to kill you unless you follow the truth. But if you want to pay me a little sum on the side, you can be an infidel and I won't kill you." That is not rational. That does not fit in the divine purpose. Okay. So that's, to give you an example, that's what Pope Benedict said, and that's what angered so many people, Muslims and the left, you see, because he was merely talking about the truth. So again, it's not when I talk about the truth and those who do not align themselves with it, I'm not doing it in a sort of fundamental Christian way. I'm just talking about basic science. The left, anyone who's gender confused, man, you don't know science. Okay, and there is something like ethics and morality and decency as well. Okay, and all these groups are not that, and they're fighting that, and they know they're exposed. And so they've created all these isms or all these words to shut you down. And now you're going to jail in Spain, even. Okay. And we'll talk a little more about that. So a last interesting quote from him, from Father Ballester, because earlier I tried to get the most recent stuff and see what's going on. And he said in an interview, he said sarcastically, "I'm very grateful to the prosecutor's office. If we were in Pakistan, they'd ask for the death penalty instead of just 3 years in prison." Okay, well, yeah, that's coming. I mean, the point, of course, is in Pakistan, yeah, you don't just get 3 years if you speak the truth and offend them, which is blasphemy. But yeah, that's coming up. You're only getting 3 years because they're still not fully consolidated in power, these leftists. If and when they are, you can expect all the stuff that you see in the Islamic world. The sheer carnage will happen. Okay, it may not be in as uncivilized way, but it'll be just as effective, probably more effective and more lethal, right? But in as much as these groups are still not in total power and control, they're going to play the victim card and the hate card and the racism card and the Islamophobia card, etc. Okay. Let me take some chats, see what you all have to say. All right. Eric. Thanks, Eric. Are you planning on releasing another book after The Two Swords of Christ? Yeah. I'm still in the recovery phase. If you know anything about writing, or at least the way I write, I get engrossed writing, and this one took a little over a year. And then there's the great recovery phase where I'm just, I don't want to think about writing books anymore. And then after a little while, I start missing the whole process, and then I start again. But yeah, I definitely will. Probably I'll start thinking. I have various ideas, actually. So the ideas are there, but I'll probably start something in a few months. Hey, thanks for being a new member. Thanks for joining. Okay. Coltrane. I'm reading Memoirs of a Janissary by Konstantin Mihalovic, a former Janissary from the 15th century. He gives incredible insight on Ottoman Turks. Yes, he does. I have that book and I read it, and I quote it, I believe, in Sword and Scimitar. So good for you for reading. Thanks, Jack. Matal. Praise God for your knowledge. Currently reading Sword and Scimitar. Love your work. God bless you, Brother Raymond. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Eric, the Divine Bard. Learning about Islam/secular forces at work to undermine us makes me angry. Any advice you can give me, a student pursuing a classics degree? Be angry. You should be angry. There's nothing wrong with anger. It's how you channel it, right? Just because you're angry doesn't mean you're going to go and kill and be violent, but you can channel that anger in a positive way. I have. So just be cognizant of the reality that we're discussing here, and you're young, so that's good. And you're pursuing a classics degree, that's good too. Even though they may be, I'm sure leftist influence has also subverted the classics. They already were when I was. What was it, Black Athena and all that. All right. Blessed 2XS. I love you, Raymond Ibrahim. God bless you from Australia. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. It's always good to hear. only meaning, hey, welcome aboard. Basileus, the king. Could you one day talk about the battles led by the Portuguese? Few people know that they fought the Ottomans in the Indian Ocean and the Battle of Diu. Greetings from Brazil. Yeah, I want, in my new book, actually, The Two Swords of Christ, I was going to end off with that because the Templars end up actually being absorbed in one of the orders or becoming a new order in Portugal. And Prince Henry and his navigations, which were all crusades around Africa and all that, which most people don't know about. So that is interesting stuff, and it's on my list of things that I'd like to write, but I didn't include it in the book because, as you'll see, the book's over 500 pages, The Two Swords of Christ, and I had to put an end to it. But maybe at some point I'll be able to bring that in. Blessed to excess. God Yahweh bless Christians. Yes. Dan Mosby. Thanks, Dan. Super sticker. Thanks again, Dan. LH. I am an ex-Muslim. All love, brother. Thank you. I know ex-Muslims really understand the stuff that I'm talking about more than anyone else because they've lived it. People like me understand it because I'm not a Muslim, but I've lived around Muslims. I know the Muslim mentality, the Muslim culture, the Muslim language, Arabic. But obviously a Muslim knows it even on a more intimate level. So that's why they often really get it. Science, telepathic, Osiris and Jesus love you. That's an interesting combination, but okay. Thank you. Felicia B. Thank you for all you do, Raymond. I've learned so much from you. That makes me happy to hear. I'm glad you have. Daniel Savage. I received my copy of Crucified Again the other day. Thank you for sending it to me and for shining a light on history in your other books. Good. I'm glad you got it. And thanks for getting it. I'm trying to bring that book back. Coltrane. The Red Communist Green Islam Alliance is very real. I wonder who will win the fight over the dead corpse that will be society. Yeah, that's that's how it is, right? First they fight the common enemy, and then they fight amongst each other. Bluey, have you ever watched the anime Dragon Ball Z? I was getting ready to say, I don't watch that, but good one. I might have to, I'm going to, let me know if you guys want me to revisit El Zut. Actually, two quick announcements. I think my next live stream, which I think you will like based on all the many emails I've been getting a lot of emails and other communiques from people asking me, I'm afraid that the Quran translation I have is not accurate. Can you tell me what to do? Okay, so your message has reached me loud and clear, and I'm going to be having a live stream very soon about, and bring your Qurans. We're going to check them out. We're going to put them to the test. I'm going to show you the litmus test of how to ascertain if your Quran is less than faithful, its translation. And I'll tell you what you can do about it and so forth. It's definitely an important question and something I've been meaning to talk about. But the other one I might do, seeing all the popularity of Al Zut, is there's a lot of other Arabic hadith that are rather problematic. So I might do a live stream about that as well. And also, I don't like doing these things just for the fun of it, to make fun of Islam, but there are lessons to be learned. And in this case, it's the contradiction of Islam. Because on the one hand, there are very, very anti-homosexual, violent verses and hadith. And then on the other hand, there's these sort of ambiguous ones, which make you wonder. So we can look at the significance of all that. We'll do that. And so what time is it? We've gone on for a while. So let's have some concluding thoughts. Let's wrap it all up, right? So on the one hand, all that we discussed right now, or I discussed, is just not even news. This has been happening all around the world. I mean, we're talking about Spain, and that is actually why that is somewhat newsworthy, and I'm going to explain why. But this is par for the course all throughout Europe, especially in UK, right? I mean, this, what I just told you, what's happening to this priest, that's just like a daily thing for people who tweet or whatever means they say anything that can be construed as critical of Islam or migration. And these people are going to jail. Okay. So on the one hand, yeah, this is just more of the usual, and we're not to be surprised. On the other hand, it's important in the context of Spain. Okay, so now bear in mind, Spain historically was a microcosm of jihad and crusade more than any other region of the world. What I mean by that is it was a small, focused little world where you had jihad and crusade going on within that peninsula, right? And that went on for about 8 centuries. Okay, and tons of bloodshed, the ancestors of today's Spaniards, who are the ones who are aligned with the left, who are screaming about human rights and freedom and Muslim dignity and Islamophobia. Their ancestors spent centuries of blood and treasure to get rid of invading Islam. Islam invaded Spain and the peninsula in the year 711, and there were wars back and forth. Despite what you've heard about a golden age and whatnot, it was mostly typified by violence and warfare, jihad, reconquista, going by century after century until essentially the 15th century, or really the 16th century, when that war was over. So it's kind of amazing, And who spearheaded the crusade or the reconquista in Spain? It was the clergymen. It was the church. Okay, they spoke more. I mean, I don't want to say Pope Benedict spoke anywhere near the way Catholics would speak. Catholic priests and popes spoke back then about Islam. He would be considered extremely politically correct. Okay, even though he's the bad guy nowadays. That just gives you an idea of how vocal Catholic priests and bishops and popes were against Islam back in the day. But they fought all these Spaniards, blood and all this bloodshed. Like I told you, centuries worth of bloodshed and treasure and destruction, spearheaded by the church to get rid of Islam. The nation's patron saint, for crying out loud, is known as the Muslim killer. Saint James, Santiago Matamoros. Okay, Santiago, Saint James Matamoros, killer of the Moor. What's a Moor? A Muslim. The Muslims that invaded and conquered Spain in the year 711 and continued in their depravities centuries thereafter. Okay, so this is pretty shocking. It's one thing to say liberal UK, which has been subverted decades ago. This sort of thing is happening all the time. But this is a new move that a country, like a staunch Catholic country whose saint typifies war against Islam and which experienced century after century on its own land. Okay, this isn't unlike England or Germany. These are places who had to go to the Holy Land crusade and fight there. But Spain, they didn't have to go anywhere. In fact, during the Crusades, popes would ban Spaniards who wanted to go crusade in the Holy Land and say, well, you have your own crusade, stay there. Okay, so that country, okay, is now putting priests in jail for speaking the truth about Islam. What a reverse, right? What a long way we've come. I talk about upside down and the amount of fake history. I talk about fake history a lot. It must be really churning in a place like Spain, which everywhere you look, you can see reflections and reminders of the long war between Islam and the Muslims. Okay. And by the way, if Ballester is found guilty, he has been found guilty, but the sentence hasn't been given yet. But he is now if he does face the 3 years imprisonment, he's going to be the first priest throughout history who goes to jail for expressing Islamophobia. Okay. Because of course it was the priests who originally were the ones speaking the truth about Islam, just like he did. And they were praised for it and they saved their nation. And now he's going to jail for it. And before closing, it's kind of ironic all that we're having this discussion today. You know what today is actually? October 10th. It's the Battle of Tours. And I made a little video about it that I published a few hours ago. And what was the Battle of Tours, which was waged today, October 10, 732? It was the Frenchmen, Charles the Hammer Martel, stopping the Muslims who had conquered Spain. Okay, they conquered it in 711, as I said. And by 732, they had crossed the Pyrenees mountain, and they were now headed very close to Paris, and they were headed to sack, the shrine of Saint Martin. but they had a massive warfare. You should watch the video and you'll see about it and what happened. And, massive clash, lots of death, all to get Muslims out of France. And of course, now France is full of Muslims, and they brought them in by themselves and are having the same exact problems that Spain is having, that the UK is having, that Germany is having, etc., etc. And so that's the difference between past and present. Past Europe, you had people who aligned themselves with the truth, who were Christian, who believed in their faith, and who cared about their civilization and their culture and their country and their countrymen and their families and their women folk and children. And they fought tooth and nail against what was then the behemoth, Islam. Remember, in the Middle Ages, Islam was the superpower, not Europe. So Europe was the backwater, okay, especially in the earlier years. And, they fought, like I told you, and spilled so much blood, both in Spain and all throughout Europe, like at this Battle of Tours. And here, their descendants, spitting in the eye of their ancestors who did all this and died to provide them with freedom and decency, are doing everything to not just bring the historic enemy, who's still talking and thinking and acting like the historic enemy, but now if you protest, if you have a problem, if you mention the truth, you go to jail. Okay. Very dangerous times. And, these men, Charles Martel, who today stopped the Muslims at the Battle of Tours, are no doubt turning in their graves. And with that, I will, I see a couple more. John, thank you, Raymond. But how do we battle a belief? There are already call to prayer being played in some areas of the U.S. and even NOIG. How do you battle a belief? Well, that's the problem. They're not letting us battle the belief, because you battle the belief through debate and dialogue, and we're not allowed to do that because that's called hate speech. Even in my new book, The Two Swords of Christ, I give you a solid example of what interfaith dialogue looked like historically, and I talk about St. Francis of Assisi with one of the caliphs in Egypt. And he spoke like Benedict, even more so. He just called it out the way it is. He's saying, why are you killing Christians? Why are you doing this? Et cetera, et cetera. And he almost got killed for it. Okay, so, how do we battle a belief? We have to be able to speak. And that's why this entire topic that we're discussing, free speech, the exercise of free speech, it's very important, because it's not even about, when people hear the word free speech, this is how I think. I almost think like it's, we're allowed to say anything, no matter how, stupid or absurd or silly. And that's fine. Okay, it should be that, I guess. But in this case, it's being weaponized against not silly, stupid things, against the absolute, unvarnished, demonstrable truth, which is so well documented and everywhere. It's crazy. Okay. So people need to wake up and see what this is really about. This is totally about shutting people down. And that's why it's hard to battle a belief system, as you're asking. Okay. So this is why this topic is very important, to make sure that free speech survives in the West. And again, it seems free speech is okay for the left if you're mocking Christianity or something like that. But I'm talking about speaking the truth. And that's what there's a war on. So it's not just free speech so I can say anything I want. It's actually, there is a concerted effort and war to suppress the truth, which is even more dangerous than free speech. Andrew. Thanks, Andrew. Okay, with that, I will bid you all adieu. Thanks for joining me. And I'll let you know about the Quran live stream, which should be shortly, hopefully within a week. And like I said, bring your Qurans with you. We'll put them to the test. And you'll probably be disappointed a little bit. All right. Bye.